Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting-edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you want more daily health education, be sure to follow us on Instagram, which is filled with health optimization how-tos, grocery shopping lists, guided breathwork posts, myth debunking, and so much more. You can find us at Wild Health MD on Instagram.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wild Health Podcast. Mike Mallin here. I've got with me Dr. Matthew Dawson. We've got a fun one for you this week. We're going to be talking about debunking weight loss tips. And I'm sure if you spent any time on the internet in the last 20 years, you've been overwhelmed with the number of recommendations and tips that you can get around your nutrition and your overall diet and health. And while we don't like really talking about nutrition, one thing we do love is debunking things that aren't true and validating those things that are true and using the science to do that. So Matt, thanks for coming on with us this week and helping us with this topic.
For sure. You said it's a fun one. What are you most looking forward to on this pod? I'm just curious that you caught me off guard with this is a fun one on weight loss.
I think it's like kind of fun when you do like this kind of like rapid fire. Here's a tip that you can find on the internet. Is it actually true? And then you get to like talk about the research about why it's true. You don't find that fun? I think it's kind of cool.
Okay, yeah, no, it sounds like a fun as a barrel of monkeys or whatever the good saying is. And and I think just to riff on that kind of debunking and what's the truth. I think we've said this a lot. I think our general view of like science is like getting a closer and closer approximation to the truth. So we're not, I think, going to have an ultimate answer on these because these are kind of hot topics that people disagree on. We're just going to give you like our read of the science and what we believe about it, which is hopefully useful to you.
Absolutely. So
we
we've got
reserve the right to be wrong and change our minds at any time.
Well, especially when research changes or the data changes, when we have to change our minds. But for right now, these are our answers to these myths. So we've got about 17-ish or so, I think, just like averaging here. I'm not actually counting. And I think what we'll do is just we'll run through them and talk about whether we think they're true, sometimes true, always true, totally false. And then we can talk a little bit about the research and kind of go from there. Sound good, Matt?
Yeah, that sounds good. And I just to clarify one thing there, you said like just quote unquote debunking myths. We're not actually saying these are all myths. Like some of these are true and some false. So we're just we're taking a stab at what we believe about these things that are kind of controversial right now.
All right, first one coming at you, Matt. So this tip around losing weight says that skipping meals or intermittent fasting is the quickest way to lose weight. What do you think?
Okay, so I guess there's a specific question there, and then there's a lot of nuance. Like, if you don't eat, is that a quick way to lose weight? Absolutely. But it's a little more nuanced than that. I think the question they're getting at is intermittent fasting like all it's cracked up to be? I think that's how I would read this question instead of just the way it's directly written. And for that, I mean, we want to look at the literature because there's an incredible amount out in the popular press, and so much everybody's doing intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding, or whatever you want to call it. So when I look at and I think my view on this has changed a little bit in the last few years, actually, I think as the evidence is changing. So there's a big systematic review on intermittent fasting and weight loss specifically, because there's other reasons. You may want to do it for insulin resistance and become more insulin sensitive, and so great, that's good for that. But if we're talking specifically about weight loss, there's a big review, looked at 27 trials, and they found that the weight loss ranged from 0.8 to 13% of baseline weight in these studies. Some of the studies, though, which I think is the more important point, compared intermittent fasting to just straight calorie restriction, because if you don't eat a meal, in theory, you're eating less calories that day. And those results were kind of up and down in general. Intermittent fasting doesn't really show more gains than just calorie restricting. And I think most of the benefit from intermittent fasting is the fact that you're just going to be a little more calorie restricted. So I think, to me, intermittent fasting is more about how much you calorie restrict, and that leads to how much you lose weight. Like if you do no food until noon, but then you get all the calories you would have eaten the rest of the day, you're probably not getting much of a benefit. And there's also downsides to intermittent fasting, like potentially muscle loss as well. So I think intermittent fasting, when I think about applying it to a patient, I think the evidence is mixed. And this is really a very individualized situation. Do they need to lose weight and have plenty of muscle and they can lose a little bit? They have insulin resistance, we may use it more. But it's a very individualized. It's not a one size fits all. I do not recommend everyone do intermittent fasting. And I recommend, I think, to less people than I did a few years ago based on my reading of the evidence.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I've definitely trended towards using intermittent fasting less in my patients. And that's really, it's really because of well, I mean, the research has backed some of it, but also just experience with using intermittent fasting clinically. We've found that people lose more muscle mass and have difficulty with slowing their metabolic rate, which is not always ideal, especially in someone who doesn't necessarily need to lose a lot of weight. So I think the patient that we still think about it a good bit in is the person who is metabolically unhealthy. Those are the people that seem to, if you look at the studies, also respond the best to it and have the most reduction in body weight. But you still have to be careful with muscle loss, and you still have to be careful, especially in women, with fasting around the hormonal cycles, doing it at the right time of the month, and then also always being mindful of people who've got any eating disorders or have ever had an eating disorder. That's something we always need to think about. So definitely a nuanced one. I think if we had to say, is this true or not, sorta, is probably the answer that I come up with. That's about the best we can give.
Yeah, I think if someone needs to lose weight, it is certainly a viable alternative. But I think the benefits are more about just being in a calorie deficit state than they are about the timing of the food so much. Is just kind of my general thought.
100% agree with you.
Try.
Yeah, and it's maybe important just to think about intention. Like, what is your intention for intermittent fasting? If it's losing weight, then maybe, yeah, let's talk about it. If it's longevity, I'm really more convinced that longer fasts have an advantage for longevity than intermittent fasting. I'm not sure that you're truly getting into really significant ketosis or autophagy with an intermittent fast unless it's paired with a really aggressive exercise regimen. And then what's the difference between that aggressive exercise regimen with or without eating is also a big question too, because usually people can't get it quite as high intensities if they're fasting when they exercise. So lots of nuance there, but the intention and the reason for the fasting is also important to when you decide whether to use it or not.
Yeah. And when it comes to longevity, I personally don't feel like there's enough evidence to say intermittent fasting would have a positive or negative effect on it. I wouldn't say it's going to have a negative effect on it, but I could see it going either way with the muscle mass loss potentially. And I just don't think there's enough evidence, certainly evidence for weight loss and insulin resistance, but probably not for longevity. Jump to the next question, Mike. The next one is another kind of food timing question. And this is, eating at night causes weight gain or prevents weight loss. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is a pretty old tip that's been around for a very long time, that basically you shouldn't be eating late at night. Interestingly, there is a decent amount of research to suggest that this is not true. But there's also some research to suggest that it's sort of true. So there's, multiple studies, one in obesity in 2017, another one in Nutrition News in 2015. And they found that people didn't necessarily gain weight by eating late at night. However, even though they weren't actually statistically significant for gaining weight, they did find that they had poorer eating habits. So they tended to eat higher calorie content. They ate crappier food. I'm not sure if this resonates with anyone listening to this podcast, but generally when you eat at night, what are you eating? It's crap, right? So, important information there that I think is is interesting and definitely speaks to a trend towards a worse diet. There's also some research that's come out that shows that eating late at night has a different response in terms of insulin levels. Basically, your pancreas doesn't respond as well late at night, and that may have something to do with melatonin receptors on the pancreas itself. And because of that, now you've got higher blood sugar for higher levels because you don't have as much of an insulin response to the food that you are eating. So we certainly recommend to our clients at Wild Health that they don't eat 3 hours prior to bedtime for this very reason, because you tend to eat worse food. It may have a different effect on your overall metabolism, and it may lead to metabolic syndrome. So while the data doesn't necessarily say that you're going to gain more weight because of it, all those things are bad. So we tend to lean towards no for this one.
Yeah, and there are some studies showing. There was a study out of Harvard Medical School that found that eating later in the day can significantly impact hunger levels, calorie burning, the way fat's stored in the body, maybe some hormonal changes there. So there is some evidence, but like you said, it's mixed. And I think this is one of the interesting ones where it's like sometimes a little bit about semantics and like real world versus a lab. I think if you had people in metabolic chambers and you fed them the exact same calories and everything, the timing wouldn't matter that much. It may have a tiny effect, but in the real world, like you're talking about, like what I eat between when I wake up and 5 p.m. is almost perfect. What I eat from 8 o'clock on, if I eat, is just disgusting. So like it's kind of that, like, I don't know if it's necessarily the timing, but it's more about the willpower then and everything else that's going on. So it's just a good practice, I think, to not eat 3 hours before going to bed when we're talking about real world situations.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. All right, let's do the next one, Matt. I love this one. Exercising one part of your body will help you lose fat in that particular spot, AKA spot exercising. So, i.e., I want to lose belly fat. I'm going to go do a bunch of crunches.
Yeah, no, I lost 50 pounds with doing curls. So this is definitely true. No, this we should say next. Like, this is not true. This is just period. Not true. Next, unless you have anything to say.
No, I don't have anything to say. This it's just silliness. Let's not. Okay. There's data to back us up. Go look it up. All right, I'll give you the next one then. Drinking lemon or detox drinks help in a significant weight loss. So this is like waking up, having lemon juice, a shot of lemon juice in the morning, or taking apple cider vinegar, other sort of detox types of drinks.
So I think when I hear people doing this and I see this, in general, my thought is, no, this is junk. This is crap. This doesn't work. However, I don't want to just dismiss things because there's a lot of people that talk about it. So when I try to look at the literature on this, there's not a whole lot. Like there may be one or like individual studies like showing potentially some benefit, but I think those have more to do with like you're giving someone something to do and they're thinking about it, and there's a bit of a Hawthorne effect and stuff. None of the studies I think are any good that show much of a benefit. And my reading of just kind of detox diets in general like this or lemon detox diet, I don't see much there. So again, there's not a ton of evidence for or against. People aren't doing massive NIH-funded studies on this. But in my reading of literature, I'm not a big fan. This is not something I would necessarily recommend. At the same time, it doesn't hurt. Like having some lemon water in the morning or whatever. Yeah, totally fine. Yeah. Knock yourself out. Don't think you're going to lose a ton of weight doing it.
You're not going to hurt yourself. It might not taste great, but you're not going to hurt yourself drinking some lemon juice or apple cider vinegar or anything like that. So if there is some like minuscule benefit that hasn't been shown out in the research, then cool. I think that's my take on it as well.
Now, Mike, the next question: what if you put 1,500 milligrams of metformin in your lemon juice each day? So taking a metformin pill will support weight loss. Tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, this one's nuanced for sure. But I think generally the answer is, yeah, you're going to lose weight if you take metformin. Now, it's nuanced in terms of how much weight you're going to lose and whether you should be taking metformin. Clearly, if you're obese or if you have a history of prediabetes or diabetes, then you're going to lose some amount of weight taking metformin. There was a study in Diabetes Care in 2015 that basically showed an average of 2 to 3% body weight loss over the course of a year in those patients who were taking metformin. So we know that there is some amount of weight loss. It is higher in those people who have diabetes, prediabetes, or obesity. the average Joe who takes metformin is also probably going to lose a little bit of weight too. But it could potentially come at some side effects, like, for example, a reduction in energy production during exercise, which I know is commented on quite a bit in the longevity community, where people basically feel like they don't quite have that like fifth gear to get into when they're taking metformin. So it's a bit nuanced. Do you want to do it or not? Certainly if there's obesity or metabolic disease.
Yeah, I think the average Joe will lose some weight because the average Joe is overweight in America. I think your average super fit Joe is not going to get. I mean, the downsides may outweigh the benefits. I mean, you mentioned a couple studies. There was also a big meta-analysis, 21 trials, so really big study, and average BMI reduction of 1.3 units, which is significant. Some other studies I saw like 11 or 12 pound weight loss on average. But these are in people who needed to lose weight in general. Your average Joe, sure, can lose a few pounds. Your average super fit Joe, I don't recommend metformin usually for them unless you have elevated A1C or elevated or you're overweight, overnourished.
Yep. All right. What about Ozempic, Matt? Ozempic is the best no strings attached shortcut to lose weight. That couldn't be any more of like of clickbait right there.
Yeah, I don't know why we got to put no strings attached here. Like, there's strings attached to everything. There's certainly going to be side effects. Does it work to lose weight? Of course, like absolutely. Like in the biggest studies of this, like in 2 years of experience, like people lose like 15% of their baseline weight compared to like 2% in the placebo. So it certainly works. I will say we mentioned semaglutide or Ozempic here. I, in general, if I'm going to recommend it to somebody, I think tirzepatide has better side effect profile, so I'm going to that instead of Ozempic, just as a side. But certainly works. Certainly are strings attached. We don't really know the long term effects. We do know that there's the rebound effect. Like most people actually will gain most, if not all the way back. There's also a lot of muscle loss. So there's plenty of strings attached. But overall, I mean, I hear a lot of people down on this. Like a lot of people are taking it. It's really trendy. A lot of people also, it's very polarizing. A lot of people are really down on it and say it's a shortcut, all these things. Well, if someone is 100 pounds overweight, there's a lot of negative effects that, like, I'll tolerate a little bit of muscle loss. I'll tolerate some side effects just because of how important it is to get that weight off. So I think it's a great drug in the right person, obviously.
So let me just sort of talk for a second about this because this sort of irritates me. The idea that you don't want any muscle loss when you lose 100 pounds of body fat is ridiculous. Like the reason you have all that extra muscle is to move that extra body fat around. So we expect a certain amount of weight loss. Now, what you don't want is a disproportionate amount of muscle loss to fat loss. That's what you don't want. So what I do definitely recommend is that we really track closely with our clients using these medications with, things like DEXA scans where we can accurately track muscle loss and fat loss. And also that you don't do it, in isolation. Like Ozempic and tirzepatide and, semaglutide, all these things need to be done with an exercise regimen with dietary changes, just like any other thing that we do in a lifestyle change. We're not just assuming this is a magic pill in of itself, because if you do that, then you're going to get rebound effect. What you have to do is you have to use the trick, right? But use it in conjunction with lifestyle change so that if you do ever try to come off of it at some point, you don't immediately all gain the weight back and it'll all be fat in that case. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, when I'm talking to people about this, I'm going to say Ozempatide, so I don't have to say both Ozempic and tirzepatide. When I'm talking about Ozempatide with somebody, I start off by telling them, I'm not going to prescribe this if you don't commit to increasing your protein intake and doing resistance training, because those are really important. Now, if they don't do it, I'm going to prescribe it. I'm lying, but I'm not going to. I just want to really press the point and just really push them to, hey, you got to establish some healthy habits. You want to hold on to as much muscle mass as you can. You're going to lose some, but we really want to actually try to prevent that as much as we can, knowing that it's just going to happen.
Yep.
Mike,
all right,
I'll ask you the next one. Drinking half a liter of water, 17 ounces, will increase the calories you burn by 24 to 30% for an hour afterwards.
This one's pretty interesting. So this basically comes straight from a study that was in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism in 2003 that found that drinking half a liter of water increased metabolic rate by 24 to 30% for basically an hour. And cool. Yeah. I mean, I think we know water is good for you. We should be drinking water for multiple reasons other than losing weight. Hydration status is extremely important, kidney function, all those things. We don't want to overdrink too much water because you can actually make yourself sick by drinking too much water, give yourself hyponatremia. But yeah, drinking water is a good thing. The studies support that. You're likely to burn more calories if you drink water more regularly. In addition to that, it actually turns out that if you drink water before meals, you actually eat less. So there's a study in obesity in 2010 that found that if you drink 2 glasses of water before your meal, you eat 75 to 90 fewer calories during that particular meal, which could be, up to close to 300 calories per day if you're drinking 2 liters of water or 2 glasses of water before every meal. 300 calories a day, if you're trying to lose weight, that adds up over time. And we're talking pounds over the course of a month or so. So, that's pretty impressive. So I think there's pretty good data to back up this claim that drinking water leads to weight loss.
Yeah, I learned something here. Like when I first saw this question, I was like, no, you're not going to increase your calories you burn by 24 to 30%. Like that's crap. There's no way. And then when I looked it up, like, yeah, you're right. This is directly from the study. And to quantify that actual increase too, because that can be a little misleading, 24, 30%. You think, wow, that's a great amount, but it is for an hour. So when they actually quantified it, it was about 100 calories, which is interesting in terms of what you said about drinking water before a meal that could decrease calorie intake by 75 to 90. So if you round that up to 100, like technically 3 times a day, if you're drinking couple big glasses of water like before each meal, that could add up to 500 to 600 calories. Now, when you're in a deficit like that, you're going to be a little more hungry, so you're probably not going to get 500 to 600 calories per day by drinking a lot of extra water. But I've known people who swear by it, like, I just started drinking a lot more water and I lost weight. And I thought it was like kind of in their mind a little bit more. I kind of like poo-pooed it. But after seeing this, like, it totally makes sense. 2 big glasses of water before every meal. And the first study we talked about, we're at 100 calories over this hour. That has to do too with mainly about 40% of the effect comes from the thermogenic effect or thermogenic response, like your body warming the water from 22 to 37 degrees. So there's a case we had like ice water, like 2 ice waters for meals. Like it's a significant amount each day. Really interesting. I was very surprised when I looked this up. It's kind of shocking.
Yeah, this one surprised me too, for sure. What if you replace half a liter of water with coffee? So there's another claim here that basically drinking coffee supports weight loss by increasing energy levels and the amount of calories you burn. What do you think about that?
So yes, so a comprehensive meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials showed that caffeine, it does have an effect. It was specifically for every doubling in caffeine intake in this study. That was 13 randomized controlled trials, 600 participants. They found for every doubling of caffeine intake, a mean reduction in weight, BMI, and fat mass by 22%, 17%, and 28%. So pretty impressive. Caffeine definitely increases your metabolism. There's probably an effect similar to the water of just feeling full, not feeling as hungry. I would say, based on the last kind of thermogenesis thing we talked about, maybe iced coffee is probably even better for you because you got to warm it up. It's not already body temperature or more. But yeah, drinking, and I've for myself noticed this. If I drink a fair amount of coffee in the morning, I'm just not as hungry. Like I'm on more metabolism, I can feel it higher, and it's a little bit of an appetite suppressant. So this would definitely make sense. You want to all the other things, no caffeine in the afternoon because of sleep and all that, but yeah, you got to say yes to this one. Evidence supports it.
Probably important to balance this one out with our understanding of caffeine metabolism as well, though. CYP1A2 and whether you're a fast or slow metabolizer affects whether you have positive or negative outcomes with drinking caffeine. So good to know your genetics and whether you should be leaning on this one or just sticking with regular ice water rather than drinking the iced coffee. But turns out that not just coffee, but also green tea might have similar effects, although not quite as prominent. So there's a study in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2005 that showed that green tea extract increased energy expenditure by 4% over 24 hours, and actually increased fat oxidation, which is pretty interesting as well. So there is some data to suggest that green tea could be really helpful.
And when I look at that study, like honestly, what I think about it is they're using green tea here, but it's green tea extract. And I have to believe it's probably just the caffeine, like the coffee. I don't know. Like obviously there are some good things, ECGC, other things in green tea. But if we're talking about the calorie effect and the energy expenditure effect, there's just less caffeine in green tea than coffee, and there's less of an effect, it seems, compared to the coffee studies. So I don't know this for sure, but if I just had to guess, kind of putting all this together, it's probably mainly the caffeine from the green tea. And it'd be interesting to see if you match the caffeine levels by having more of the green tea and made them similar to coffee, and see if it's the same effect. But they both have caffeine, and they both seem to work.
Yeah, to be honest, off the top of my head, I'm not positive whether green tea extract has caffeine in it or not. That's something we should probably take a look at and figure out. But definitely the EGCG, at least in the green tea extract, seems to have had a pretty significant benefit in increasing fat burning by up to like 17%, which is pretty impressive.
At least that's a good point. I assumed it did, but yeah, we should we just look that up right now instead of giving that information?
Why don't you look that up and I'll start doing the next one.
Sweet.
All right. So the next one is this one's pretty interesting too. And I got to be honest, I learned something here too. Using smaller plates reduces how much food you eat while giving you the perception of having eaten more. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, I don't know, really? Like, could that actually be true? Turns out, yeah, totally true. So a study in the Journal of Consumer Research in 2012 demonstrated that using smaller plates can significantly reduce the amount of food consumed. Participants using smaller plates ate up to 22% less than those using larger plates. And then another study in Appetite in 2015 found that smaller plates led to a 30% reduction in food consumption. I don't know why I didn't necessarily believe this when I first read it, because obviously, our hormonal effects has a lot to do with how much you actually eat, and the psychology of food is extremely important, obviously. So it makes sense that if you are looking at a smaller plate and it's full and you eat everything on it, you're probably not going to continue eating because you've finished your plate. You'd have to go back for seconds. That takes, initiative and intention, and it leaves an opportunity to stop if you feel full. So, sort of makes sense when you think about it, but I was really impressed by the numbers. 20 to 30% reduction in food consumption just by eating off of a smaller plate. Pretty nuts.
Yeah, there's mixed studies on this. So there's some that don't show much of a difference, and I think this probably has to do with the study design and who they're studying and how they're studying and things. So there was a big meta-analysis as well that just the studies were all kind of mixed. So I think there's probably something here. Again, there's no downside probably to doing this, but it's less evidence, I'd say, than the other ones. I don't think you're going to get the same bang for your buck. And I did look it up. Green tea extract does have caffeine, and it's just kind of what we assume. It has caffeine in it, but it's typically a bit lower than a cup of brewed coffee. So we're probably, our thought on why green tea extract is probably correct. Either way, it seems to have an effect, just less than coffee when it comes to that.
Yep. When green tea has less caffeine than coffee, which we know. So yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. Mike, what about chewing more slowly? Is that going to help you eat fewer calories and increase the production of hormones that are linked to weight loss? See that out there.
Yeah, I've seen that out there for sure. I've always assumed that this was true, just because if you chew slowly, you're actually eating slower. You're not only are you doing that, but you're also allowing the saliva to have more effect. You're going to extract more nutrients from the food. There's other benefits than just potentially eating less total calories. But I assume this was true, and turns out it looks like it probably is. So there's a study in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2009, found that individuals who chewed their food more slowly consumed 10% fewer calories. Basically, another one in Appetite of 2013 supported basically the same finding. This could be there could be multiple things here. You're slowing down the process of eating, so your neuroendocrine system can produce more hormones to tell your brain that you're full, because you're not eating as fast. That's front of mind. You're being more mindful when you slow down and eat your food, chew your food more, which is probably having an effect in making you think that you're actually eating more than you actually are. So lots of different possibilities as to why this works. Makes sense to me. Hard to do. In my opinion, a standard American diet is not only eating terrible food, it's also eating it on the go in your car, driving from one appointment to the other, or cramming it in your face as you're walking from one office room to another. So there's a challenge here for sure. This is not culturally the way that we treat our food in this country.
Yeah, people compliment me all the time that I eat like I'm a prisoner. I think it's a compliment, right? I don't know what they're actually.
That's a compliment.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, I'm told that a lot. So thank you. The next, actually, I asked that one. You asked me the next one.
I got the next one for you. Next one is high protein foods have been shown to reduce appetite and increase fullness compared to foods that contain less protein.
Yeah, so there's a fair amount of evidence for this, and you mentioned earlier kind of the neuroendocrine and hormones related to appetite. So there was a big study in the Journal of Obesity and Metabolic Syndrome that kind of outlined why this is the case. It proved that it is the case. It enhances body composition, decreases fat mass while preserving fat-free mass. But they also looked at some of those levels, like the anorexigenic hormones, which reduce appetite. Those are increased. And you have a decrease in the orexigenic hormones, which enhance appetite. So there's more satiety, you feel fuller, and you eat less food in general. So there's other studies as well. American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found the high protein diet induced reductions in appetite, ad libitum caloric intake went down, body weight went down. So there's good evidence for this kind of high protein diet. I think in the last 10 years, protein got a little bit vilified with mTOR and things and all the talking around longevity. And so it kind of fell out of favor. But then in the last couple of years, it seems like everybody's talking about high protein again. But if we're talking specifically about weight loss and appetite, I think the evidence is pretty clear about protein. I certainly wouldn't want to go on a debate with anybody about the longevity and hormone and protein. We could have that debate, but it's not as clear. But for this question, reducing appetite, increasing fullness, losing weight, yes, high protein diets work. The evidence for that, I think, is pretty clear.
Yeah, and I'm not taking the bait on that. I'm not talking about longevity and protein. I'm still trying to figure that one out myself. I think it's really, really unclear. But when it comes to losing weight, if I've got a patient with metabolic syndrome, I'm leaning towards protein diet almost always. Sometimes we'll do more high fat, low carb, but generally high protein is the first step in treatment for sure, and that's to help increase satiety and reduce total calorie consumption. That's the goal.
Great. What about probiotics, Mike? So the next statement is probiotics help regulate gut bacteria, block the absorption of dietary fat while reducing appetite and inflammation.
Yeah, maybe. So there is a study in Scientific Reports that basically used a model where they gave probiotics and influenced the genes involved in appetite control and glucose metabolism, and suggested a role for probiotics in regulating appetite, basically. There's another study in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that discussed the role of probiotics in weight management. And that study highlighted that higher protein diets, often including probiotics, lead to greater weight loss, fat mass loss, and preservation of lean mass. The study also showed that high protein meals contribute to greater perceived fullness and elevated satiety hormones. So interesting for sure. There may be something there. I wouldn't say that the evidence is definitive. And the challenge here is probably in the fact that we don't have a lot of probiotics in our armamentarium to treat the microbiome to improve overall weight loss. What I'm really interested in is actually Akkermansia, which has been shown to basically have a similar effect as semaglutide because it's actually producing the same hormone in the gut, but from bacteria rather than getting it from a shot. So this could suggest that treating with a particular probiotic, Akkermansia, could lead to weight loss. And there has actually been at least one study so far to show that. So early research, but there is some data to suggest that prebiotics could actually improve weight loss in the long term, and certainly no downsides. I mean, we use these things all the time for other reasons, like overall gut health, reducing inflammation. We talk about the gut-brain axis, gut-heart axis. All those things are important. So I think this is one where there's a lot of opportunity here. The data may not be 100% clear, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of downside.
Yeah, I mean, not super clear data, but just be honest with this, you and I are both taking Akkermansia. Like, we kind of believe in it from the most recent studies. Like the one big study where it reduced A1C by 0.6%, which is massive. Like, you and I won't get that reduction because our A1C isn't that high, but I'm taking it because I think there are some metabolic benefits. And Akkermansia actually produces GLP-1, so it's kind of a natural Ozempic. I mean, that's a bad way to put it, because that's like a clickbait headline, a natural Ozempic.
It's kind of true.
But it's a similar mechanism.
Yeah, it is clickbaity, but it's kind of true.
And so, and I mean, why I'm taking this, because I think it's going to have a little bit of benefit on the A1C, and honestly, it's more about the food cravings. Like, I think there's really interesting data around the GLP-1s with addiction and food cravings, and like what I just mentioned about eating crap at night. Like, I'm interested to see if like there's a mental effect for me from, and I've just been taking it for a couple of days now. But I think we both are believers in this in general. Whether or not how much weight you're going to lose, I don't think we have great evidence on its effect on weight loss, but we can extrapolate a little bit if it is similar, if it does lead to increase those peptides.
All right, Matt, how about the next one? Get better sleep because sleep deprivation disrupts the daily fluctuations in appetite hormones, leading to poor appetite regulation.
Yeah, so there's a few studies on this, looking at it both ways. So there was a study on sleep restriction, and when they did sleep restrict people, they found that their brains, these are in normal weight individuals, they had a heightened brain activity in response to unhealthy food cues. So this is like, when you're sleep deprived, you make worse decisions. You see that donut and your brain lights up more and you want it more. This reminds me of you and I used to do shift work, working all night, and just how horrible you'd eat after a night shift. I remember getting off like at one of those swing shifts, getting off at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was as late. The only thing that was open was a Taco Bell. And so I remember going through the Taco Bell drive-through and ordering, and I got up there, and the car behind me was like a car full of people. And they actually gave me those people's food. And I didn't realize it till I got home. But I got home and I pulled into my garage, and there's like just the shame is overwhelming me just thinking about this. I opened it up and I was so excited. I like ate all 4 people's food, just like all these burritos and whatever Dorito Crunch Supremes, and I ate it all like at 3 in the morning. And I remember putting the bags and everything in the dumpster, like, but covering it up, like putting it weight down, because I was just so ashamed of what I had done. But yeah, I got personal experience with the effect. And then then going the other. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we've talked about this before. We think that a lot of the downsides of shift work might be just associated with the eating. I mean, you go into a hospital overnight, and every nurse's station, every time is full of crap. I mean, there's donuts and cookies, and like, people just eat terrible food at night, whether you're awake or not. If you're eating at night for whatever reason, the human tendency seems to be to eat terrible food. And that may have so much to do with all of the cancer risk, the mortality risk, the cardiovascular risk associated with shift work. I mean, I think we've talked about that before in other podcasts, but I think that there really is something there.
Well, that's been our experience, but there was a study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition where they looked at this. Sleep deprived individuals had a preference for high calorie sugary snacks, and they found that Specifically, sleep-deprived subjects consume 300 more calories from snacks, primarily consisting of sugars and fats than those who weren't sleep-deprived in the study. So very quantitative there. And then the opposite is true. There's a study looking at the effects of sleep extension on the timing and stability of meal intake patterns. And basically, they found that participants who extended their sleep duration by 1 hour per night experienced a 15% reduction in daily calorie intake and exhibited a more consistent meal schedule. So 15% reduction in your daily calories, that's like probably 400 to 500 calories, maybe 300 to 400 calories, depending on, but that's a significant amount just by sleeping a little more.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty big difference. So I think the answer to this one is a definitive yes. This is true.
Yep. What about fiber, Mike? So fiber may delay stomach emptying, make the stomach expand, and promote the release of satiety hormones. This can help you eat less without having to think about it.
Yeah, this one looks like it's entirely true. There've been multiple studies on fiber. Obviously, fiber is touted as beneficial for multiple health reasons, but one of those reasons around weight loss is associated directly with production of satiety hormones and delaying gastric emptying. So multiple studies in Journal of Nutrition have actually shown this. And what happens is basically the stomach, takes longer to start to squish up that food or do whatever it needs to do to it in the stomach before it puts it out into the intestines. And that time spent in the stomach is likely increasing satiety hormones such as leptin and cholecystokinin. So that's going to have the effect of making you feel fuller after a meal that has high fiber in it. So you're going to actually be fuller for a longer period of time after a high fiber meal than you would from a low fiber meal. I don't think this is a big aha for anybody, but it is backed up by the research and to me is 100% true. And one of the reasons that I recommend high fiber diets to just about all my patients, outside of the other benefits like gut health being the biggest one, reduced cardiovascular disease risk, reduced dementia risk, reduced inflammation. It's like, how many things can we think about? Basically every major chronic disease is in some way tied to the amount of fiber in your diet.
So to summarize, let's go through them one at a time real quick. So intermittent fasting, yeah, we use it, but it's not the end all be all. Like how many books are written about this kind of drives me crazy. It's a tool, not for everybody. Eating at night, don't do it. Don't eat within 3 hours of going to sleep. Exercising one part of your body, curls for everything, for all your ills. No, that the consensus on that was no
sarcasm.
That doesn't help. Lemon detox drinks, knock yourself out. I don't think you're going to lose any weight from it. Metformin, if you need it, you're overweight or your A1C's up, it's going to have an effect. Ozempic, so we're not saying both of them. Lots of upside, but some downside with it as well. Water, that's the biggest surprise and takeaway for me. A couple glasses of ice water before meals, significant calorie reduction there. Surprising. Green tea and coffee both work. Coffee a little more, probably just more caffeine intake is probably the reason for that, but that's a hypothesis. We don't know for sure, but that's probably what's going on. Smaller plates, sure, not a ton of evidence, but probably works. Chewing more slowly, get the time, go for it, but not great evidence. High protein, thumbs up, definitely works. Probiotics, not great evidence, but enough for us. We're doing it. Better sleep, that definitely makes a difference. More fiber, and that's it. I think those are, some of that's pretty basic, but I think going over the evidence for it is always good, just to, because some of it there's not good evidence for.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. We appreciate you coming on the podcast today to go over this with us. That was awesome.
Thanks for having me for the fun Barrel of Monkeys episode.
All right. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you're a Wild Health patient, you might not know, but you have access to our referral program. This gets your friends and family 25% off Wild Health services. Just head to Clarity, and in the top right corner, you'll see Refer a Friend. Click there, and you'll be brought to a page with your referral code. Happy sharing.